I'm going to do this and then take a break and give you guys about 15 minutes. And this, tonight I want you to take the break as opposed to most nights. And you can take it in here if you want. But the break is for a specific reason, and that is any questions that people have. Because I've engaged in several discussions online, and some people have come in and asked me about different things to do with either foundations, projects, or application papers. So what I want to do is I want to give everybody a chance to get those questions in their mind and bring them out onto the table tonight so everybody can benefit from the discussion. Does that make sense? So I'm going to spend about an hour in class doing that, or however much time you need. So we're going to do this in two pieces. We're going to spend about an hour on just the basics of what standards-based is all about. I want to give you familiarity, but I don't want to bury you in detail, because to be honest, the whole standards-based thing can be complex, and also it is not one size fits all. Often people say, I'll give you the example of a guy I talked about earlier, and I have a lot of respect for the work of Kenneth Cooper, so I'm not being critical of Kenneth Cooper, but he's done a lot of work on standards-based. He says categorically, don't measure effort. Either, you have to take it out completely and never measure it, or, and he favors taking it out completely, or you measure it totally in a separate area. Well, I say, wait a minute now. I mean, effort to me counts in a lot of cases more than talent. I'm sure that every one of you knows, can think of an example. I could think of a dozen without even having to put any effort into it, of people that had tremendous, tremendous talent, never went anywhere. That really didn't, they took their talent and just wasted it. And then there's other people out there who are pretty average maybe in ability, but because of their effort, because of their desire, because of their willingness to push, really made something out of themselves. Now, I know I've talked about it before, I'm kind of a sports fanatic, but, the examples that always come to mind, I remember two people. One of them would be Eric Lindros, who was a star hockey player. When he came up through the juniors, everybody said, this guy is going to be better than Gretzky, and Gretzky was a superstar. Okay? In fact, when Lindros came up, Gretzky was still playing. This was before he retired several years ago. And everybody said, Lindros is even better than Gretzky. He's stronger, he's faster, he can do all the things with a stick and a puck that Gretzky could do, but he's way better player. Well, actually, some of those things were true. His talent was unbelievable. But Lindros never really, he was a disappointment in the National Hockey League. He was a disappointment to his teammates. He was a disappointment to his fans. He never led his team to a championship. He had tremendous, tremendous talent, but he just didn't work all that hard. And, it's kind of sad in a way, but that's the reality of the way the world works. And there's other people out there, the other example is a guy I remember who played for Boston, Terry O'Reilly, back in the 70s. Very average, not a very good skater, couldn't handle the puck all that well, often gave the puck away. Wasn't just, his talent would have made him very average. But he became a star and led Boston teams to the finals many, many year after year. He spent, I think, 14 years in the NHL, and he was captain of his team and so on. He was a real star in Boston. The fans loved him, but he worked harder than anybody else. He was out on the ice every game. He was always out before practice. The coach gave him drills. He tried him. He probably was the hardest worker in the league. And that's so true with students. Well, so there's things about standard-based. I'm going to be honest with you, even as we discuss it. Some of it you can take or leave. Okay? But there's certain things about the way, what it's all about. Standards-based is basically taking education and breaking it up into things that are deliverables. Okay? Have any of you heard it in the sort of the business world, deliverables? Have you heard about that? Right? Now, we don't use the same word. We call them standards in education. Okay? But if you're how many of you in here have some kind of a business background at one time or another? Anybody? Business people? One? Anybody else? Just one? Two? Okay? What is a deliverable all about? If I say deliverable, do you have any idea what does that mean, deliverable? I say, this is your deliverable in this job. Or this is your deliverable in this project. What does that mean? What's a deliverable? Give me an idea?
I'm not sure my understanding what it is.
Just go ahead. Let's hear what you have to say.
What we understand from deliverable in marketing terms is where you are doing something that your customer will understand.
Okay. Okay, so it's an understandable outcome. Good. What do you think? There are other business services. Products and services. In other words, it's something that it's tangible, it's measurable, and it provides value to the customer, the client, right? When education, standards are similar. Is that we are looking at something that is needed when we get to the end of a process. Does that make sense? It has to, this student should be able to do certain things, right? To give you an example, when George W. Bush was president, one of the things he said he wanted to do was that every student would be reading on grade level by 3rd grade. Now, that's a deliverable. Now, in fact, it's very difficult to do because some students come in 3rd grade and they already have reading problems and so on. Okay? But that is an outcome. That is a standard. That's what you say, this is what the standard is. We can measure. We can look at the reading level and say, okay, these kids are on grade level by 3rd grade. If they're not, well, there might be certain things we have to do. Right? But that's what it's all about. And the other thing is, let me just kind of draw a couple of pictures here, is that, and you'll notice in your reading they do this. They talk about standards-based, and they started out, it's very student-centered approach. So they start with the student, right? And so if you start with the student, then as you go outward, and you start looking at things like leadership team, you might have teaching, or teachers and teaching. I'll just put teaching. But of course it refers to the people that are doing the teaching, the teachers as well, right? And then if I say leadership, of course it also refers to the management team, who is leading the instruction, right? Is that when you take the student, everything comes from what the student needs to be successful. Does that make sense? What are the standards that we apply? So this whole standards argument or discussion should start with the end. So if we're doing something like, if we're using Dr. Covey's, you might use Dr. Covey's Habit 2. Habit 2 for Dr. Covey, I don't know how many Covey fans we have in here, but Habit 2 says you start at the end. Covey said begin with the end in mind, right? So if this is the outcome, okay, so if we use the George W. Bush example, and we say, okay, 3rd grade, so take the 3rd grade student, okay, reads, excuse me, sorry about the D there, on grade level. Now, I may not have worded that exactly correct as it was in the No Child Left Behind Act, but that's basically the idea, right? Okay? So then you start, like Covey said, begin with the end in mind. You say, okay, this is where we want to go. And we're here. Let's say the student comes in pre-K. If pre-K is the 1st grade you have. A lot of American schools don't have pre-K. They might start in kindergarten. Okay? It doesn't really matter. Wherever you start, is you look at the inventory. What is the skill set? Well, maybe the student is an English speaker. In some cases, if you are in California, maybe a lot of the students are Spanish speakers. If you're in certain parts of New York, they might be Italian, or Chinese, or Japanese, or Thai as their first language. So you cannot necessarily assume, right, that they're coming in as an English speaker. So you say, what can you assume? What is the level? The average level. So in kinder, you might have, you might be able to start with speaks. Maybe the base you can assume is that the student speaks some English. That's probably a safe assumption. Even if the student just came from Japan and got off of the plane yesterday with their parents, they probably can say 5 or 6 words in English. I might not know a lot more than that, but they probably speak some English. Does this make sense? So then you say, okay, so now we have what? 3rd grade? So you have 36 months. And in actual fact, you only do some of that as instruction. You do about 10 months of instruction a year. So you have 30 months of instruction to get from here to here. It's a 30-month time. Does that make sense? 30 months of instruction. The school year is about 10 months long. Right? So then you have to put it all on. What are the things we have to do on the way to get to this endpoint, to get to this standard? Does that make sense? And you might say, well, isn't this what we've been doing all along? Actually, it's not. A lot of the time, if you look at, like, traditional education, we often use, well, let me ask you guys, if some of you can say. If we have standards-based, so we put these bars there, and this is where you have to get to. You have to jump this bar at a certain time. And we teach the skills to get you up there. So you can get to the point where you can clear that hurdle, right? And then we get you to the point where you can clear another hurdle. What does clear a hurdle mean? Reach what you're trying to learn. Right? That make sense? So if we are doing that, that's standards-based. If I say, well, isn't that what we always do? Not exactly. What are some of the things we do right now? Okay? What are some of the ways we assess that is not along the lines of this? You're saying, I don't know. Okay, what about, has any of you ever heard of something called norm referencing? Nothing to do with the guy on Cheers, okay? This guy Norm, we checked against Norm. You don't know who Norm is. That's Loyal was right. Only Loyal, right? Yeah, those jokes don't work too well, do they? Okay. Anyway, forgetting about Cheers for a minute. You don't know what norm? Okay, maybe you don't know what norm. Okay, so that's all right. What if I do this? What if I draw this thing? This is called a bell curve. A traditional bell curve is a norm reference system. Okay? In a norm reference system, we have the majority of people are going to fall in here. So if your grade, your average grade is around a C, that's the average grade that people get, which would put them inside, I don't know, the 70s, number-wise, whatever it is. But let's say we say this is where the majority of people will fall. Maybe 80%. What is it? Somebody said 60?
Yeah, 68 or so.
Okay, yeah, the mathematician back there can correct me on this because I'm not an expert. So let's say it's 60% of the people who will fall in this range will get the C. That means the C, most of the people are going to get C's. Right? As you go this way, you have the winners. These are the Harvard guys. You get to go to Harvard or Yale, okay, or the ABAC in some cases. But these guys up here, very low percentage, are maybe getting 90 or above. So they have A or maybe A+, right? Have you seen this before? Okay? As you go down the other way, these are what we might call the losers. All right? These guys are going to be in the F range. Maybe in here you get to the D if you're lucky. And these percentages are lower. They add up to the other 40. Right? So so in any group, you have 20% of them are losers, about 20% are winners, and about 60% are somewhere in the middle. That's a pretty harsh world we live in, right? But that is what we call norm referencing.